welcome to the deep dive, everyone. Today we're going to take a journey, a deep dive into, well, federalism. But with a twist, right, for all you philosophy lovers out there.
Exactly. We're going to dig deeper, like really explore the history and the philosophy behind this idea, federalism. We got some excerpts from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, stuff on federalism, and trust me, this isn't your typical boring academic stuff.
Okay, so first things first. What even is federalism? I mean, we hear it everywhere, but like, what does it actually mean? Especially for someone who, digs into philosophy.
Well, basically, federalism, it's about splitting power, right? Between the big guy, the central government, and the smaller units, like states, provinces, you name it. But here's the catch. Both the big guy and the little guys, they get a say. It's this whole shared rule and self-rule thing. That's what makes federalism, well, unique and, like, philosophically pretty cool.
So it's not just a one-man show, not just one big boss up top.
Exactly. Think of education in the U.S., for example. States have huge power over their schools. They decide what's taught, who can teach, even how to spend a big chunk of the money. But the federal government, they have a role too, right? They make sure everyone gets a fair shot at education, that kind of thing. It's a balancing act. Both sides got to have a voice, but not step on each other's toes.
Gotcha. So we're talking USA, Canada, the usual suspects, yeah, those classic federations.
Spot on. Those are the poster children, the federations we all know. But things get more interesting when you compare them to the unitary states. Like, take the UK or France. The central government, they're the ones holding all the cards, basically. And then their confederations are like, well, imagine a bunch of independent states kind of hanging out, working together on certain stuff. The European Union, that's one example, although, to be honest, it's a bit of a mixed bag. It's got some federal stuff going on, too. But the main difference with confederations is the members, they're still calling the shots mostly. They can nix decisions made by the group, even leave if they want to.
Okay, I'm starting to get the whole picture now, the different flavors of power sharing. But here's what surprised me when we were digging into this. Federalism, it's not just a Western thing, Our sources, they mention examples from all over the world, going way back.
Totally. It's a myth that federalism is some Western invention. This idea of unity with diversity, local control with, like, central power, it seems to be something humans all over have thought about.
So, spill the beans. Hit me with some of those global examples. Where do these ideas pop up in unexpected places?
Okay, let's start with the Maori over in New Zealand. They're a traditional society. It's got these clear federal elements. You've got the Wanao, the family groups. Then they form hapu, like clans. And then those join up into bigger federations, the iwi. They get together for things like defense, cooperation, that sort of stuff. Even within the tribes, they understood you need some local control, but also some bigger alliances.
Wow, so it's like baked into their whole social structure. Amazing. What other examples are there?
Well, way over in pre-14th century Uganda, the Ganda society, they had something similar. Power was shared between the chief, called the Sabataka, and the heads of the tribes, the Mutaka. Each level, it had its own, like, zone of control. A clear example of different levels of government, each with their own thing.
So there's this pattern, right? Balancing power at different levels. It makes you think, did anyone outside the West think about this, like, as a formal idea?
There are a few that come to mind. In ancient China, Mencius, the Confucian philosopher, he had this three-level social order, kind of like federalism. He said responsibility for, like, people's well-being, it should be spread out between families, the community, and, well, what we'd call the state.
So it's like a bottom-up approach. Start local and only go bigger if you absolutely have to.
Exactly. And it's not just about political stuff. Take the Islamic idea of zakat. It's a form of charity, Depending on where you are, you see different levels of, like, government involvement in zakat. Sometimes it's all handled by the community. Other times the government plays a bigger role.
It's like even within a religious duty, people were figuring out how much power the central authority should have. It really shows how these ideas of federalism, they pop up everywhere, right?
For sure. Another great example, one that fits our philosophy theme, is Ubuntu. It's a philosophy from sub-Saharan Africa. It's all about interconnectedness. The idea that how well you do depends on how well your community does. And that has implications for how we think about governing. It points to a model where different levels of authority work together to, like, help everyone thrive.
Ubuntu, it always gets you thinking. Okay, so we've seen these ideas, sharing power, local control, popping up in different cultures. But where do we find the roots of, like, what we'd call modern federalism, the stuff that's influenced Western thought?
Well, federalism in Western thought, it's a long story with lots of twists and turns, lots of famous philosophers chiming in. But the best place to start probably is Aristotle. His idea of the polis, the city-state, it was basically a multi-layered community with different levels of government.
Of course, got to start with Aristotle. Always laying the foundation, that guy.
Hmm.
But how did his ideas specifically shape how we think about federalism?
See, for Aristotle, the polis wasn't just like a political thing. It was a whole community aiming to achieve the best for its people. And that meant different areas of life, each with their own way of doing things. Families, villages, associations, they all played a part in making the polis work.
So these different levels, each with their own jobs, it kind of echoes federalism.
Right,
Okay?
exactly. And then, fast forward to the 17th century, we meet Johannes Althusius. Some people call him the father of federalism. He said societies, they form through covenants, like agreements, between individuals, families, communities, even different levels of government.
Covenants, huh? Sounds like Locke.
Uh,
Was Althusius inspired by him?
he was definitely drawing on those ideas, the whole social contract thing, but with a twist. See, Althusius was writing during a time of religious wars, crazy stuff. He wanted to find a way for different religions to live together, to stop the state from forcing everyone to believe the same thing. He said these covenants, these agreements, they gotta be based on non-religious stuff. Pretty radical for his time.
So he was like, let's have federalism, but without forcing everyone into the same religious box.
Hmm.
A true visionary. But what about other big names? Montesquieu, Hume. What did they think about federalism?
Montesquieu, he was writing in the 18th century. He was all about confederations, remember, the systems where the central government's kind of weak. He thought those systems, they were the best for protecting freedom and keeping people safe, by stopping too much power in one place and letting local areas find their own solutions.
Makes sense. A philosopher worried about individual freedom would like that approach. But didn't Hume have a different take on things?
He did. Hume was actually for large republics, not small states. He thought they were better at stopping factions and tyranny. He even suggested a federal model with a strong central legislature, although he said, yeah, local areas should have some self-rule too.
Interesting. So even during the Enlightenment, the big thinkers were debating the best way to do federalism.
Totally. And of course, we can't talk about federalism without talking about, well, America. The debates when they were writing the U.S. Constitution back in 1787, that was a huge moment.
Oh, yeah, for sure. You had the Federalists like Madison and Hamilton saying we need a strong central government, and then the Anti-Federalists pushing back, worried about tyranny and losing state power. It was a battle of the philosophical giants. Were one of their main arguments.
The Federalists and the Federalist Papers, they argued for balance. They knew they needed to protect individual rights, but they thought they could do that by carefully dividing powers between the federal government and the states. Madison, he really wanted to stop the tyranny of the majority. He thought a big, diverse republic with a federal system would make it harder for one group to take over everything.
So not just limiting government, but dividing it up smart, keep everyone in check. But the Anti-Federalists, they had some good points too, right?
Absolutely. They worried the Constitution gave the feds too much power,
Yeah.
that eventually it would squash the states. They were also skeptical, like, could a republic really work on such a big scale? It's crazy how relevant those debates still are today. We're still figuring out how to balance central power and local control. Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it, how those old debates still matter today. But let's shift gears a bit and think about the why of federalism. Like, why choose this system? What are the big reasons, especially for, a philosopher?
Now that you mention it, we've been looking at all these examples, but we haven't really tackled the why question. So give it to me straight. Why federalism?
Well, it's a question philosophers have been wrestling with forever, and like most things in philosophy, there's no simple answer. But we can kind of break it down, right? First, why pick a federal system over just having a bunch of independent countries? And second, why go for federalism instead of a system where the central government's got all the power?
Okay, that makes sense. Two sides of the same coin. So starting with the first one, why have federalism at all? Why not just let everyone do their own thing?
One big argument, and this is something a lot of philosophers would agree with, is that federalism, it helps you get stuff done that individual states just can't on their own. Like, think about national defense. A federation, they can pool their resources, create a military that's way stronger than any one state could manage.
Right, strength in numbers. Makes sense if you're worried about security. Are there other practical advantages like that?
Tons. Take the economy, for example. When you get rid of trade barriers and set up some common economic policies, a federation can create a bigger, more integrated market. Everyone benefits. And then there's the whole preventing war thing. When you've got a bunch of independent countries right next to each other, there's always a risk of conflict. But a federal system, it gives you a framework for working together peacefully, for sorting out disputes. It can really lower the risk of war.
It's like a built-in system for conflict resolution. Pretty appealing, especially if you're into peace and stability. But now let's look at the other side of the coin. Why would philosophers prefer federalism to, like, a more centralized system?
This gets to the heart of some big philosophical questions. One key reason is protecting individual liberty. When you divide power between different levels of government, you get those checks and balances we talked about. It stops any one authority from becoming too powerful, too controlling. It's all about protecting individual rights and freedoms by making sure no one has absolute power.
It fits in with that classic liberal thinking, right? The idea that we need to limit the power of the state to protect individual freedom.
Exactly. And it's not just about stopping tyranny from the top down. Federalism can also protect minorities from being steamrolled by the majority. By giving some power to member units, it lets different values and preferences flourish. That's really important in societies where you've got distinct cultures or languages. A centralized system might try to force everyone to conform to one set of norms.
That whole unity and diversity thing, right? Recognizing and respecting differences instead of trying to make everyone the same. I could see why a philosopher who cares about pluralism and individual expression would like that. Are there any other arguments for federalism over a more centralized system?
There's the argument that federalism can lead to more people participating in government and make the government more responsive to local needs. When you have multiple levels of government, it gives people more chances to get involved, to have a say in decisions that affect them directly.
So it's about making government closer to the people, more accessible, more accountable. Does this connect to any specific philosophical ideas?
It definitely resonates with thinkers like Tocqueville, who said local self-government is super important for democracy. And because those member units have some freedom, they can tailor policies to fit their specific local needs, which a far-off central government might not understand or be able to deal with effectively.
Okay, so we've got protecting individual liberties, respecting diversity, getting people more involved in government, and making government more responsive. That's a pretty strong case for federalism.
Yeah.
But let's be real, there have got to be some downsides, right? Some challenges that come with this kind of system.
Of course, there are always trade-offs. Philosophers have spent ages thinking about the potential downsides of federalism. One big concern is the possibility of conflict and instability.
Yeah, I can see how that could be a problem. Different levels of government, responsibilities overlapping. It sounds like it could lead to confusion and arguments.
It definitely can. One of the big challenges with federalism is figuring out exactly what each level of government can do, where their powers start and stop. If those lines are blurry, you get disputes, legal battles, even political gridlock.
Yikes. So it really is about striking a balance, making sure each level has enough power to do its job, but not so much that it oversteps its boundaries.
Exactly. And it's not just about writing rules on paper. You need ways to resolve disagreements and make sure different levels of government cooperate. That's where things like constitutional courts and agreements between governments become really important.
It sounds like a constant process of talking and compromising, trying to keep everything running smoothly, even though there's this built-in tension.
It is. And a federal system, it doesn't just depend on the laws and institutions. The political culture matters too. People need to feel like they belong to the same community, and they need to be willing to compromise. That's how it really thrives.
So it's not just about the rules, it's about the people and their commitment to making the system work. But even with the best intentions, there are going to be challenges with this kind of setup.
You're right. No system is perfect, and federalism is no exception. A huge challenge is keeping things stable, stopping the whole thing from falling apart. If member units feel like the central government's ignoring them, it can lead to resentment, separatist movements, even civil war.
So got to keep everyone happy, make sure everyone feels like they're a part of the system, which in a big, diverse federation sounds like a tough job.
It can be. And it's not just about stopping things from breaking down. There's also the opposite problem, too much centralization. Over time, the central government might grab more and more power, taking away from the member units. It basically turns the federation into something more like a unitary state.
So a constant balancing act, finding that sweet spot between too much central control and not enough. But I bet there are even deeper philosophical issues hiding under the surface here, things our philosopher listeners would be really interested in.
There are. And one that's super relevant is the whole question of sovereignty. If power is divided, like, where's the ultimate authority? Can a federal system really be sovereign, Or does sovereignty have to belong to one place or the other?
Now, that's a head-scratcher. It's like trying to hold on to smoke. The whole idea of sovereignty seems to change depending on how you define it.
It's a question that's been debated forever, no easy answers. Some philosophers say in a federal system, sovereignty is shared. Both the central government and the member units have a legitimate claim to ultimate authority, just in different areas.
So it's like a two-headed dragon. Each head controls its own territory, but somehow they both represent the ultimate power of the whole thing.
That's one way to think about it, but others say this whole idea of shared sovereignty doesn't make sense. They say sovereignty, by definition, has to belong to one ultimate authority.
So it's either you can't really share this ultimate power. It's a fascinating problem.
It is, and it has real-world consequences, especially when you think about things like secession, a member unit trying to leave or changing the Constitution. Who gets to decide the fate of the whole federation? Who has the final say?
I can see how this could lead to some pretty intense philosophical and political arguments. But I'm sure our listeners are dying to hear more about how these ideas play out in the real world. What other challenges do federal systems usually face?
Well, there's the whole question of designing the Constitution. How do you divide powers effectively? How do you build in those checks and balances to stop abuse of power? And how do you create a system that can adapt to change?
It sounds like some seriously complex architecture, like designing a building with multiple floors and rooms, all connected but with their own functions.
Great analogy. And there's no one right way to do it. The perfect constitution for a federal system depends on so many things. The history, the different cultures in the society, the goals the federation is trying to achieve.
So you got to tailor the system to the specific needs of the people it's supposed to serve. But even with the best constitution in the world, things can go wrong, right?
Absolutely. No system is flawless, and that includes federalism. One big challenge is keeping that stability we talked about, stopping things from falling apart. If member units feel like they're being ignored or pushed around by the central government, it can breed resentment, separatist movements, even civil war.
So we're back to making sure everyone's happy and feels like they have a voice. But that seems easier said than done, especially in a big, diverse federation where everyone wants different things.
It's a constant struggle, and it's not just about preventing things from collapsing. There's also the risk of too much centralization. Over time, the central government might start taking more and more power, chipping away at the autonomy of the member units, basically turning the federation into something more like a unitary state.
So it's this constant balancing act, trying to find that sweet spot between too much and too little central control. But I have a feeling there are even deeper philosophical questions woven into the whole fabric of federalism.
You're absolutely right. One that's particularly interesting is the challenge that federalism poses to traditional ideas about democracy.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me more.
Well, in a unitary state, it's pretty simple, right? Majority rules. But in a federal system, it gets more complicated. You have all these different levels of government, each with its own voters and ways of making decisions.
So whose voice really matters? Whose interests win out?
Exactly. And how do you balance majority rule with protecting the rights of minorities, especially those concentrated in certain member units?
Those are questions that have kept political philosophers up at night for ages.
They have. And there's no magic formula for finding the perfect balance. Federalism forces us to rethink our assumptions about democracy, to explore new models that can handle the complexities of shared power.
It's making me question everything I thought I knew about democracy.
That's what's so cool about looking at these ideas from a philosophical perspective. It challenges our preconceived notions and makes us think deeper.
Well said. And I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about. Time to let them digest all this philosophical food for thought. We'll be back soon to explore even more nuances of federalism. And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into federalism. Man, we've covered a lot of ground, haven't we? History, philosophy, the good, the bad, the ugly of federalism. It's been quite a ride.
It really has. And as we wrap things up, we're going to uncover some even deeper philosophical stuff, especially about, well, what it means to be a citizen in a federal system.
Okay, I'm hooked. How does federalism change how we think about citizenship?
Well, think of it this way. In a federal system, you're a citizen on multiple levels, right? You're a citizen of your local community, of your state or province, and of the whole federation, like those Russian nesting dolls, one inside the other. And each level, it comes with its own rights, responsibilities, even loyalties. It's a unique situation for philosophers to think about.
So could our loyalties clash? Like, do we have to pick one over the others? How do we deal with those potentially competing allegiances?
Those are the million-dollar questions, the ones philosophers love to chew on when they're looking at federalism. There's no easy answer, no recipe for finding the perfect balance. It's something we're always working on, both as individuals and as a society.
It sounds like federalism really challenges our ideas about identity and belonging. It makes us think hard about where our main loyalty lies and how to make all those different levels of belonging work together.
Exactly. And that complexity, it spills over into how we think about, like, sharing resources and responsibilities in a federal system. And that brings us to another big philosophical idea, distributive justice.
Ah, fairness. Always a hot topic in philosophy.
Hmm.
How does federalism make this even more complicated?
In a unitary state, it's simpler. The central government takes taxes, then redistributes the wealth to even things out and provide services. But with federalism, things get a lot messier.
Because you've got all these different governments, some rich, some poor.
Right. Some member units might be way richer than others, which can lead to, like, different quality of public services or big gaps in how well people are doing economically.
So how do you make things fair in that kind of system? How do you balance the right to self-govern with the need to, like, help out the less fortunate parts of the Federation?
That's where things get really philosophically juicy. Does a rich state have a duty to help out a poor one? And if so, how much should they help? Or does that kind of redistribution mess with the autonomy, the right to self-govern of each member unit? These are tough questions, no easy answers. And they get to the heart of what it means to create a just and fair society.
It's that constant push and pull between unity and diversity, but now with a moral dimension. It's not just about how power is structured, it's about making sure that power is used for good ethically.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Federalism makes us face these fundamental questions about fairness, equality, and what we owe to each other as citizens. It's about balancing individual rights with what's good for everyone and figuring out how to manage shared power and resources.
These are big issues. They're not just theoretical debates. They affect real people living in federal systems all over the world.
They do. We see these arguments about distributive justice happening all the time. It reminds us that philosophy isn't just some abstract thing. It's tied to how we organize ourselves, how we live our lives.
True that. Okay, we've looked at the history, the philosophical arguments, the challenges, even the ethical dilemmas of federalism. It's been an incredible journey. But before we wrap up, I got to ask, what about the future of federalism? With globalization, technology changing everything so fast, is the traditional model, based on nation states, is it still relevant?
That's the question everyone's asking, and I think philosophers are the ones who can really explore it. It's a question about how we imagine the future of human communities. How do we balance the need to work together globally with the desire for local control and identity?
So, more questions than answers, which honestly is what I love about diving deep into these philosophical topics.
It's all about the journey. All right. But seriously, that's the beauty of philosophy, I think. It doesn't hand you a set of solutions. It gives you the tools to ask the right questions, to really think critically about the challenges we face, both as individuals and as a global society.
Couldn't have said it better. And on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into federalism. I hope you've enjoyed this exploration as much as we have. It's been a real treat to kind of untangle all these complex ideas together.
It's been a pleasure, really. To all our listeners, especially those of you who, like us, love to ponder the big questions, we'll leave you with this. As the world gets more interconnected, more complicated, should we be rethinking federalism? Could we see new kinds of federal arrangements popping up, ones that go beyond nation states? It's something to think about as we try to make sense of this ever-changing world. Keep those questions coming, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.